Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, gamer! Greetings, fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 102 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith somewhere outside time and space. I have got another great show for you today. Got a lot to cover today. Hope I can get through all of it. I'm going to be talking about how to run an adventure for brand new players to the RPG hobby, as well as some thoughts and words of encouragement and advice for new GMs out there and those players who are maybe considering trying GMing someday. You really should. I'll also, of course, respond to some of your feedback, and I got a lot of great feedback for both episode 100 and episode 101, which was the interview with Matt Colville. So thank you very much for the feedback. So as I said, I have a lot to cover today, so let's get into it. Roll for initiative.
This is Matthew Colville, and you're listening to Game Master's Journey.
So I thought I'd give you just a quick update on my D&D campaign today that I'm running. I'm running Curse of Strahd, which you probably know, unless this is your first episode of the show, in which case, welcome to Game Master's Journey. Here we talk about game mastering and playing RPGs, just all kinds of RPG goodness. So I ran my Curse of Strahd campaign last week, and it was a pretty interesting session. Now, I don't want to give away any spoilers to the Curse of Strahd adventure, because I know a lot of you are either running it or playing it. Let's just say that there's a certain encounter involving a lot of bad guys. We're talking like 30. And so the PCs are, in my case, the PCs were outnumbered about 5 or 6 to 1. 5th edition is really interesting. I'm really learning a lot as a DM and relearning some things that I used to know in the 2nd edition days and have forgotten, and kind of maybe unlearning some bad habits. So what do I mean by that? Well, I didn't even realize it until I started really running in this edition of the game. But I think a combination of running a lot of 3rd edition and 3.5 and running quite a bit of Pathfinder, it kind of got me into this headspace where I was thinking about, quote, balanced encounters a lot, and maybe too much. And by balanced encounter, I mean an encounter that's designed to be a certain level of challenge for a certain party. And, you know, in 3X and in Pathfinder, you have this idea, and you have it in 5th edition too, of, okay, I have a party of this many player characters of this level, so these numbers and types of creatures would be a suitable challenge for them, which means, you know, something that isn't going to be super easy necessarily, but chances are decent that they'll be victorious as long as they play smart and are incredibly unlucky. Now, the designers of 5th edition seem to be like making a conscious effort, it seems like, to break us of that habit and to break us of that way of thinking. Because I've commented on the show more than once, I think, about how multiple times in published adventures for 5th edition, I've come across encounters that are not balanced. They're either, well, you always come across encounters that are way too easy. That's nothing new. But I'd come across encounters that seem like these are way too hard. You know, there were numerous encounters in the Tyranny of Dragons campaign that were like that. There are numerous encounters in Curse of Strahd that are like that. And Lost Minds of Phandelver. So, you know, at first I assumed, perhaps in my arrogance, that, well, the people doing this, they don't know what they're doing and they don't understand their own encounter math because they're breaking their own rules and all this. And I've since come to question that, whether that's really the case or whether that was actually and is actually a conscious decision. And I'm leaning now more towards thinking it's a conscious decision, especially after talking with Matt last week about kind of his thoughts about encounter balancing and how he doesn't worry about it. And he just throws things at the PCs and adjusts on the fly if he needs to. And, it kind of made me wonder, well, maybe that's kind of how the designers of D&D, maybe that's how they kind of approach it. And this encounter design that's given in the DMG is much more of a loosey-goosey just benchmark than it is this is how to build your encounters kind of thing. This whole thought process has kind of opened my mind to the idea of, maybe I don't need to worry about it so much. And maybe, I just design encounters that I think are cool, and I trust that my players find a way through them. So anyway, bringing that tangent back to the topic, which was my game session this last week, I have this encounter with these 30 critters, right? And I'm looking at it in Curse of Strahd, and I'm like, this is crazy. There's no way the party's going to survive this. I mean, they're not super powerful creatures, but there's 30 of them. And I'm like, there's no way. And it's funny because before I started having these thoughts about encounter balancing, I might have been like, this is too powerful of an encounter. I need to fix this, right? But I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just see what happens. And there's the idea of presenting an encounter to the PCs that they're not supposed to fight. And one of the tricks to doing that is if you're going to present something that could be a combat encounter to your player characters and you don't want them to fight it, one of the ways to communicate it to your players without just coming out and saying, I don't want you to fight this thing because, that's lame. So one of the ways that you can communicate that is to create an adversary or a group of adversaries that are so beyond the PCs that it's obvious to the players at first glance that this is not something they can hope to be, that they should find some other solution. So I think that's what this was, because what can communicate to your player characters more strongly that, hey, you guys can't handle this, you should run away, than having 30 of them. So I was like, okay, this is cool. Surely when my player characters see 30 of these things running at them, they will do everything they can to get away or find someplace defensible. They're not just going to meet them in the open field. Well, I tell you what, I learned a very important lesson in this game session. And it's a lesson that I've learned more times than I can count. I learn this lesson pretty much every time I run an RPG. And yet I still need to learn the lesson again. And maybe this should really be the topic of today's episode, which is you cannot predict what the players are going to do. I cannot predict what the players are going to do over 20 years, going on 30 years of running RPGs. And I still cannot predict what player characters are going to do, what players are going to do. The best I can do is come up with maybe 5 educated guesses, and maybe they'll do one of those 5 things, but I'd say it's about 50-50. They either do one of those 5 things or they do something else I didn't even think of. So my players indeed did not run away from the 30 critters running at them, did not try to find a fortified position or anything like that. They just and charged them, basically. So that was interesting. It got pretty hairy. Had, I think, half or more of the party went down, and then the 2 player characters who weren't down on the ground unconscious ended up hiding inside of a building. But that wasn't the end of it, because these things were trying to get in like super zombie style. So they ended up dealing with that. And I don't want to spoil anything. So if you want to know exactly what happened, you can always go check out the YouTube video on my YouTube channel. But yeah. Yeah. And just to further this lesson that I learned, that I cannot predict what the players will do. I can't even predict who will claim a given magic item. And I've seen this time and time again in just my 5th edition campaigns. Sometimes I create a magic item for a specific PC. And I've learned long ago that when I do that, I always make sure to award that item in a way that A, it's obvious who the item is for, and B, the item is in some way basically given to that character. So the only way another character is going to end up with it is if they literally steal it from the first character. Because I've learned if I have, let's say I have a party and there's one character in the party that's a dwarf. And so I make a magic item and I want to make a magic item for this dwarf character. So I'm like, oh, I'll make it a dwarven magic item. And then surely the dwarf will end up with it. Yeah, no, that doesn't work. Or I have one elf. So I make an elven item. You know, I mean, you would think that would work all the time or every time, right? Or 9 times out of 10, about 50-50. Sometimes it works. And the elf character is like, oh, I want that elven sword because it's elven. But then, you know, the times that you really count on that, no, the character's like, I don't really care about being an elf, or I don't care about swords, or I can't use my dex bonus on that sword, so I don't want it. The bottom line is you can't predict. Even when you think you can, you can't. So there's a very powerful item, not quite an artifact, but it's a legendary item that the PCs found. And I mean, I didn't really care who ended up with the item. It doesn't matter to me, but I had in my mind, I was pretty sure who was going to end up with it just based on the characters and what kind of weapons they used and how the characters were built. And so I'm like, yeah, you know, I think that the ranger is probably going to end up with this item because it's a sword and he uses swords, and he's also the most martial of the characters. He's the best kind of fighter type. Of course, he's more focused on archery. So I'm like, yeah, it'll probably be him, but we'll find out, right? No, it wasn't him. The bard decides to take the sword, and he's going to start leveling in fighter now so that he can use his sword better. Never saw that coming. I guess the takeaway from this, what I learned from this session, it was funny because I had 2 things happen that both kind of drove home this point of you can't predict what the players are going to do. I mean, you definitely want to try as a GM, especially if you're doing something kind of more plotted. But even if you're doing a sandbox, like Curse of Strahd is very much a sandbox. And it's like, you know, I can't prepare everything in the Curse of Strahd campaign. And this Thursday, I'm ready for everything that the players do. I mean, if I had a photographic memory or if I had unlimited time to study the book, maybe I could. But as it is, I can't. It's just too much material. So I need to have some idea of what the PCs, at least, you know, a few things that the PCs are going to do the next week or could do. You know, there's 20 options. I pick 3 of them to prepare, right? So, you know, I actually asked the players, you know, what are you going to do next week? But I also kind of think, you know, well, what do I think they're going to do? What are those dangling plot threads that I think are the most juicy right now that they're going to go for? But, you know, sometimes I'm wrong. But you definitely, as a GM, you know, you want to do that. Even, you know, I guess it doesn't really matter if you're doing sandbox or plotted. You still want to kind of try to think about what you think your player characters are going to do, if only so you know what to prepare and what to be ready for. But you just got to remember that 50-50 about, it seems like you're going to be wrong. No matter how well you know your players, no matter how well you know their characters, no matter how much experience you have as a GM, you're going to be wrong sometimes when you predict what you think the players are going to do, whether they're going to take a certain item, whether they're going to go after a certain plot thread or not, whether they're going to kill a certain NPC that, you know, that surrenders and asks for mercy. You just never know what the players are going to do. So I guess that's one of the big challenges of being a GM. And it's also what makes it a lot of fun because, you know, the players surprise you. One of my players made a comment the other week in our game about how, you know, it must be kind of rough for me as a GM because I know everything that's going to happen because I've read the adventure. And it's like, Yeah, but I really don't. Reading an adventure isn't like reading a novel where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. That's not how adventures are written, or at least that's not how good adventures are written. It's more like the first half of the novel. You get your exposition, you get all your information about the setting and the characters. You get your rising action as far as, here's the situation that the players are going to come up against and that they're going to have to deal with. And in a way, you get about half of the climax, as in you get the setup for the climax. But as far as the outcome of the climax, do the player characters succeed or fail, and how? And that falling action, resolution, that's all up to the players. So I don't know what's going to happen any more than they do. Now, I do know some of the things that they're going to come up against. But even then, for instance, Curse of Strahd, there could be whole chapters of that book that we don't even touch. There could be whole parts of that story that we just don't go there because the players aren't interested in it, or they don't pursue it, or they never find the NPC that can tell them about that thing. And on the other hand, they could really go down a rabbit hole, which causes me to come up with stuff that isn't in the original adventure, to expand in the direction that they're going. And we could end up with the equivalent of a chapter of stuff that we do that isn't even in the book. So, yeah, I don't really know what's going to happen. And that's part of the fun. All right, we are at our feedback part of the show. I've gotten lots of great feedback for episode 100 and episode 101. Thank you to everyone who's sent me feedback. And again, the best way to send me feedback is by email at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Two of the messages that I've received kind of had a common theme, and that's maps. So I was talking with Matt Colville last week about, well, a lot of things, but one of the things we talked about was building your own campaign world and coming up with your own map for the world. And we were kind of talking about how unless you're an artist and or a cartographer, your ability to come up with a good map, is pretty limited. I definitely agree with Matt that there's nothing better than a nice, beautiful, evocative map, and that a lot of players these days expect or want that. But I don't know that it's necessary for your homebrew world, especially in the beginning. And, one thing I thought about is I've read a lot of epic fantasy in my day. If you, like me, have read a lot of fantasy novels, you think of all the fantasy novels you've read, and a lot of them have maps in them, right? How many of those maps are really that great? They're usually black and white. They usually look like ink or pencil draw. They're really basic. And in fact, I was recently trying to get through the Sword of Shannara book, and the map in that book, I'm like, I could draw this. If I put this in front of my players, I'd be kind of embarrassed. Like, sorry guys, here's the map. This is all I can do. And this isn't a published novel. When I read Lord of the Rings, now I'm sure it depends what version of the book or what printing or whatever you're reading, but I was just reading a trademark paperback, and the maps in those books weren't anything to brag about, and probably were something that I could do if I really put my mind to it. So maybe it's not as important in a fantasy novel as an RPG. That could be. But I don't think that the map is the end all be all. And I don't think that if you're homebrewing like me and you don't have any drawing or map making skills, that means that you shouldn't homebrew or that you should go to a published setting so you can have nice maps, because your players are going to want nice maps. I think your players will definitely appreciate nice maps if you can finagle it somehow. But I don't think it's going to kill your campaign if you don't have them. So I've had a couple people write in about maps, so I thought we'd talk about it a little bit in the feedback section of the show today. So Nathaniel Starr wrote in and said, Lex, great 100th episode. I too like the world building episodes. I'd love for you to do one on designing cities in a world of your own creation. I am struggling to make city maps. I want them to look good and detailed, but I am not artistic in that way. I've looked at some programs, but either they are too difficult to use, too expensive, or both. Do you have any suggestions? So thanks for writing in, Nathaniel. And I do have some ideas, but I've got two messages basically about the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and go to DM Nell, who also wrote in, and he was talking about episode 101. And he says, that was a great interview. Matthew is awesome. Yes, he is. I love his videos, and I'm glad you turned us on to them. In regards to the game world map you guys had, I've used a few maps in my time, some of which I've stolen from online sources. If you do a search for fantasy world maps, you can find a ton of them out there, some with labels and some without. My problem, and I assume Lex's problem as well, is that I want my world to be original, so I don't necessarily want to use someone else's map. But when in a pinch, there are some you can use out there. And then he goes on to say, for one campaign, I used a world map that I got from one of the old Dragon or Dungeon magazines that was made by the cartographer Christopher West, which I think is called Lands of Mystery. And you can find the PDF on his website, Maps of Mystery. And I will have a link to that in the show notes. Or I'm sorry, Maps of Mastery. Did I say Maps of Mystery? I think I said Maps of Mystery. I meant Maps of Mastery. It's a great world map that anyone can use, with lots of labels already on the map, so you don't have to come up with your own names, which can be a good or bad thing depending on what kind of control freak you are. I thought it was neat at first, but later regretted it because I realized that I was that control freak and wanted to change the existing names. Well, of course. I mean, why build your own world if you don't want to name shit yourself? Anyway, there are some solutions out there depending on your needs, but if you want a custom map, then I can't really help with that. Hopefully that hexographer program Matthew mentioned is your solution, which I may check out as well, as hand drawing a map is a time-consuming pain in the ass, even if you have the skill set. So back to Nathaniel. So there's one possibility for you. DM Nell here is talking about campaign maps, but I'd be willing to bet if you do a Google image search, you can find a lot of city maps for fantasy as well. So, you know, if you're just running something for your group, you know, feel free to steal something that's already out there. Something that I did kind of an early version of Primordia a few years ago. It's probably been almost 10 years ago now. I was working on writing a fantasy novel, and I was developing a world for the novel, and a lot of those ideas I've been pulling into Primordia. And what I was doing for that map is I was actually using a map of Pangaea, which I then altered. So if you're not aware, Pangaea is one of the many actually supercontinents in Earth's history, which is times when most or all of the continents that we have today were one single landmass. And there's actually been multiple times that there have been these supercontinents. Pangaea is just one of them. So if you just do a Google search for supercontinent and or Pangaea, you can find the names and images of these various supercontinents. And those are, you know, great places to start in designing a fantasy world, because you're going to have this huge continent and everything's together. And just by the nature of a supercontinent, you're probably going to have some good size inland seas and things like that. And it's going to look realistic to your players because it was real. It is a real thing, or it was. So that's another way you can go. And then DM Nell also mentioned Christopher West. And I'm quite familiar with Christopher West. He actually did the cartography for one of my favorite games, Numenera, for the Ninth World of Numenera. And if you've never seen the Numenera book or the maps for Numenera are beautiful. And I'm kind of unhappy in a way. I'm joking here, but also kind of serious. I'm kind of unhappy that I played Numenera because it's really spoiled me when it comes to fantasy maps. So Matthew Colville was talking about Hexographer, and that is an option. Hexographer is a free program that you can get and you can use. And I will put a link to that in the show notes as well. But hexographer is really basic. And for someone like me that's used to these beautiful maps by Christopher West, hexographer is not going to cut it for you. But go check it out. It is free. It seems fairly simple to use, so not much of a learning curve. On the other side of the spectrum is what looks to be an excellent program called Campaign Cartographer, which is much better than hexographer. It produces much better looking maps, but it's also much more complex, and it is not free. But Campaign Cartographer is the basic program, and then there are all kinds of modules that you can get for it. And one of those is for building cities. I will put a link to those programs in the show notes as well. You can check those out. But Campaign Cartographer is not free. It's not that expensive for software. Depending how many of the modules you get and whatnot, you're probably going to spend around $100 for it. So, if you're just wanting a map for your home group and you're not like super into world building, it may not be worth the cost. And even greater, I think, than just the cost to buy the program, I think is the cost in time to learn it. I've just taken a look at it on YouTube videos, and it's very much, to me, it looks very much on par with like Photoshop. I mean, there are tools and buttons and things everywhere. So it's going to take an investment of time to learn how to use that program well. But if you're wanting a really nice map made yourself and you're not wanting to pay a professional to do it for you, Campaign Cartographer is probably a great way to go. DMNL mentioned Christopher West, and as I said, he made these beautiful maps for Numenera. Well, one thing really cool is Monte Cook Games, the publisher of Numenera, released 2 PDFs of just maps. There are 2 map packs for the Ninth World of Numenera. And the reason I'm bringing this up is one really cool thing about these, if you get them, and they're each like $1.99. So way cheaper than Campaign Cartographer, is each of the maps there's 2 versions, and you get high res images of these maps. There's 2 versions. The first version has all of the labels on it. So it has all the cities marked, and it tells you the names of the cities and things like that. Now, I'll tell you the Numenera map, not every city is labeled. One of the philosophies behind the maps in Numenera is, basically for everything that's labeled, there'll be something that's not. And those things that aren't labeled, Monte Cook Games is never going to develop those or do anything with those. So those are, like say cities on the map that's like, well, there's a city here, but we're not telling you what the name of it is, and we're not going to ever tell you anything about it. So you can put your own city there, and we're never going to contradict you. You're never going to have to worry about, in the future, some Numenera supplement talks about that city, because it never will. So you have one map that has all that stuff, and then you have another map that's just the terrain. There's no marks for cities. There's no names of anything on it. So if you're just looking for maps for your home world or your home game, you can get these map packs for Numenera. You can use the maps that don't have any cities or anything on it. Just use the land maps, and there you go. And you've got large area maps, and then you've got maps of individual countries. So check that out. I'll have links to those in the show notes, the Ninth World map packs. So that could be a great solution for you. And honestly, if I wasn't considering maybe publishing Primordia someday, that's what I would do. Because I love the Numenera maps, and they're beautiful, and I've gotten both those map packs. So I have all these maps without anything on them that I could just put my own stuff on. I could even probably just bring them into Photoshop and add my own layer and put my own symbols and whatnot on them. But since, I want to at least leave the door open to publish Primordia someday, if I ever amass enough material for it, I want to come up with something original. So yeah, if you want something original that you create yourself, there's, paper and pencil or one of these programs, I think are your options. And again, remember what I said about, your fantasy novels, and think about your fantasy novels. And this is another kind of theme I want to hit in this show is don't let masters of a thing keep you from doing that thing. Don't let the fact that there are these beautiful maps by people like Christopher West out there, don't let that make you think that your map has to look like that. And don't let that make you think that if your map isn't that good or isn't at least close to being that good, that your map sucks and you shouldn't even bother doing a map. If your map ends up looking like the map in the Sword of Shannara book, so be it. It shows you where the ocean is. It shows you where the mountains are. It shows you where the cities are. That's what you need. You know, you don't need a photorealistic topographical map. I mean, we'd all love to have one, right? All of us that are building our own world, we would love to have someone like Christopher West just come along and make beautiful maps for us, right? I mean, we would love that, but you don't have to have that. And you know, don't let that kind of pie in the sky, oh, I'd love to have this beautiful, realistic looking map. Don't let that stop you from creating your own map, even if it is just paper and pencil. I mean, at the end of the day, you just need something to give your players to give them an idea of what's where. And, you know, if you're an old grognard like me, then you remember the old D&D stuff from like first edition days and before. And if not, just go, you know, do some Google searches and find images of the maps and handouts that were given in the original D&D adventures and even first edition D&D adventures. And you'll see that a lot of that stuff is something that you could do on your own with no artistic talent at all. So, you know, in this modern day of, you know, digital tools and whatnot, you know, we see a lot of these beautiful maps and stuff, but don't let that limit you. It's like I had Scott on here a long time ago, and Scott Kellogg actually got me playing bass guitar finally after all these years, because I was suffering from that. You know, I wanted to learn to play bass guitar, but I thought I had to be a master. I thought I had to be Victor Wooten on bass guitar. And it was Scott that made me realize, you know, think about what you want to do with the bass guitar and learn what you need to do that. And when I thought about it, I was like, well, to do what I want to do on bass guitar, I don't have to be Victor Wooten. I don't have to be that nearly that good. So it's the same kind of thing. You know, think about what you need your map to do. And what does your map really need to have to do that? And I think you'll find that it doesn't need to be a Christopher West special, although that would be nice. But again, you know, if you're wanting to go down that rabbit hole and you're willing to invest the time and you want to learn, like me, I want to learn to do it because I think it's interesting. I think cartography is interesting and it's a hobby I'm willing to take on. Right. So if that's you, then check out Hexographer or Campaign Cartographer. I want to take a minute and send a huge thank you and shout out to my Tier 6 patron, Mr. Steve Strickland. Let's hear it for Steve. Yeah. So the patrons of Starwalker Studios get some cool perks for supporting the show, including a special monthly podcast that I make just for the patrons, which I need to do that this week, and access to original game material that I come up with, and much more. So speaking of the original game material, I thought I would tell you what I've got up so far, just to let you know some of what the patrons get. So I just started this last month, and my promise to the patrons has been that I will try to put up at least one or two game-related things for the patrons every month. And hopefully some months or most months even, I'm going to do more than that. Because I actually have piles of stuff that I've come up with for 5th edition and Primordia. It's just a thing of typing it out and getting it up in a attractive and kind of finalized form, quote, finalized. So again, this is just what I've put up from March and April. So as time goes on, there's going to be more stuff available for the patrons, obviously. So I came up with 2 backgrounds. I actually came up with these for a Dark Elf campaign I was thinking of running, but you could easily use these backgrounds for anything, especially if you're doing something a little darker or evil. And that's the Masseuse and the Torturer. I did a write-up called Gifts of the Gods, where I talk about some of the divine favors that you can get from deities in Primordia. Although, again, you could easily use this in whatever campaign setting you're using, as long as there are gods or powerful beings of some kind that can grant favors and boons and whatnot. I did a write-up on Avriana's Crystal Sword of Power, which is a magic item, a legendary magic item that I came up with. Actually, this item comes from my second edition days, as does the character Avriana. So DM Nell was asking about iconic magic items and characters in Primordia, like who is my Mordenkainen? And so Avriana is one of those characters for sure, one of those iconic characters. She's originally from Forgotten Realms, from my Forgotten Realms world that I ran in way back in the day in second edition and third edition and 3.5. So this is a sword that she created. It's a pretty powerful and crazy sword that's really useful for a magic user that happens to use a sword. Another magic item, Sword of the Elven Heroes, would probably also be one of those iconic items. This is what I call a relic magic item, and relics are items that I've come up with that grow in power with the wielder. So the idea is, instead of having to do the Diablo thing of every 2 levels, your fighter gets a new magic sword, I always liked the idea of, the fighter with his iconic sword, right? Like King Arthur with Excalibur. If King Arthur got a new sword every other month, we wouldn't know any of those swords' names, right? But King Arthur had one sword. He had Excalibur, and that was his sword. And that's cool. And you lose that in D&D and games like Diablo, where, every few levels you're getting an upgraded magic item. And of course, this is really bad in the third edition days. It's not so bad now, but you still do have that, right? You get a +1 longsword when you're, 5th level or something. That's awesome. But when you're 20th level, you might, want something better than a +1 longsword. So the idea with these relics is they are magic items that scale in power with the player character's level. And I have a whole system for that and how that works. And that was actually part of the Gifts of the Gods write-ups I was talking about. I forgot to mention was the relics are in there. So the Sword of Elven Heroes is an example relic that I made from scratch. I also, in the Gifts of the Gods write-up, I talk about how you can take a powerful legendary item from, say, the DMG, and you can make that into a relic. And it's actually pretty easy to do. So I talk about how to do that. So that's what's up in there so far. And I'll have more stuff going in. And the way that works is all that stuff is in there. It's in a Google Drive folder that I share with the eligible patrons. It's in there for 3 months. So you have 3 months to download all that stuff. And then it goes into an archive folder, which certain other patrons have access to. And, it will stay in the archive folder indefinitely. So check that out. You can check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Starwalker Studios. And thank you to all the patrons for supporting the show. I really appreciate it. All right, for the main topic today, I'm talking about running an adventure for new players. And I also want to talk a little bit to new GMs out there, or to players who have not GM'd but have maybe thought about it, or maybe you haven't thought about it, but maybe, you will think about it. So as game masters of whatever game we run, we often find ourselves in the position to introduce new players to the hobby. Either players who've never played the particular game we're running before, or even players who've never played a tabletop RPG before. I have run a lot of games for brand new players in my day, both groups, but I've ran a lot of games for players who've never played an RPG before. And I've learned some best practices over the years through success and failures at running games for new players. So this can also be a really great way to get started out as a new GM. Now, there's something to be said for running your first game as GM with experienced players. If you have experienced players at your table, they know how it all works. They know how an RPG works. So they're going to be able to role play. They're going to speak in first person and things like that. So you're not going to have to worry about that kind of stuff. And you don't have to worry about teaching them how to do that stuff. They're also going to know the rules and the system so they can help you out with that. But on the other hand, they're also probably going to know the rules and systems, and they're going to want to help you out with that. And as a brand new GM, you may not want that. So, that's something to decide for yourself. If you're going to run a game for the first time, do you want experienced players at your table that can maybe help you out, but also may argue with you about how you arbitrate rules? Or would you rather have completely greenhorn players that don't know anything about RPGs? That's up to you. Personally, I think that starting out with brand new players is really nice because they don't know the rules. So you don't have to worry about the rules lawyers calling you out on every quote mistake you make. And that's if you even believe that a GM can make mistakes when it comes to the rules. You don't have to worry about arguing or justifying your decisions to them. I've also found that once you get them into it, new players can often be the best role players out there because they tend not to metagame or play the game of squares or whatever you want to call it, or get into rules discussions that kick everyone out of the game about, what's the most optimal feat I should take, right? New players don't do that. They get into character and they just play their characters because they don't know the rules. They don't know all the metagaming crap and all the optimizing crap. And in my experience, those are the best players. Those are the players I want at my table. Give me a table full of people who've never played an RPG and hopefully never played an MMO because, that's some of the same problems. Any day, new players, they get into the story, they get into their characters. Once you get them past that initial awkward stage, right? And it can be a lot of fun. Another great thing about new players is you can mold them into exactly the kind of player that you want them to be. You get a player at your table who's played RPGs before. They already have kind of their RPG persona established, that like how they role play is already kind of established. And maybe they have bad habits, or at least what you would consider bad habits. And it's a lot harder to break someone of a bad habit than it is to teach someone a new habit. And when you have brand new players that have never played before, you're their window into the RPG world, and you're the one teaching them how to be players. So you can teach them to be the kind of players you want to have at your table. For instance, you can teach them how to be in character and how to make decisions, whether those decisions are in a social situation or in a tactical combat situation, how to make those decisions from their character's point of view and not from a how do I win this game point of view. You can teach them how to speak in first person as their character instead of my character does this or Hank the barbarian does this. It's no, I do this. I do that. I say this, or better yet, not I say this, just say it. Right? You can teach them those things. You get players that are veterans and they're used to speaking in third person. It can be really rough to get them out of that bad habit. Also, if you're a player thinking about becoming a GM, don't be discouraged by the pros out there, like people like Matt Mercer, Chris Perkins. And again, this is kind of our theme this episode of not letting the masters scare you off from doing the thing that you want to do, whether that's making a map or running a game. And this came up recently. I think it was on the Game Master's Journey Google Plus group. People talking about, are people like Matt Mercer and Chris Perkins, running games on YouTube and Twitch or whatnot, is that really a service to our hobby? Or is it actually scaring off potential new GMs because they see someone like Matt Mercer run a game and they're like, oh my God, I'll never be able to be that good of a GM, so I'm not going to try. I don't know. Personally, I think they do much more of a service than a disservice. Personally, I think that person that's going to let that stop them from being a GM probably would have never tried to be a GM, or at least at that point in their life, wouldn't try to be a GM anyway. I don't know. I think that being able to see someone really good at the craft run the game, that you can learn a lot from that. And, I watch Critical Role with Matt Mercer, and I learn a lot from how he GMs. He actually, the way he GMs reminds me a lot of how I used to GM back before 3rd edition and Pathfinder kind of ruined me. So I'm trying to get back to that. So you can learn a lot, but you just because you see someone who's really good at a thing doesn't mean that you have to be that good at it, or doesn't mean that you have to run the game that way to be a good GM. Matt Mercer is not the only good GM out there. And the way he runs a game is not the only way to run a game and be a good GM. That's just the way one particular person runs the game. And the same thing with Chris Perkins. And I'm sure if you were to ask either one of those gentlemen, that they would be the first to tell you that they've learned a lot and practiced a lot at being a GM, that they didn't just come out of the womb running games like that. So I think you can learn a lot from watching other GMs, and just keep in mind that every GM has their own style. So what a given GM does, even if it's something you really like, may not work for you because it's not your style, and that's fine. So, take what you can learn and use from other GMs and use it, but don't feel like you have to imitate them or be like them, even if they're awesome. And also, why we're kind of on this right now about these pro GMs like Matt Mercer and Chris Perkins. They're both excellent GMs. I really enjoy watching their games. I watch their games specifically to learn how to be a better GM and to see a good example of a good GM. But I would argue that one of the big things that makes them so good is that they are concerned with story and fun more than they are with the rules. They both screw up rules all the time. If you look at it like, these people that comment on my YouTube videos who are sitting there with their DMG and their player's handbook open and making a comment every time, something is arbitrated in a way that goes against what's in one of those books. If you're, one of those people, then you would watch these guys. And Chris Perkins works on D&D. Like, he's one of the big cheeses of D&D. He screws shit up all the time from that point of view. I've seen him in his Curse of Strahd campaign. He will interpret spells like Detect Evil / Good as they were interpreted in previous editions, not as they are in 5th edition. So, he had a paladin in his game detecting evil, and he was having her detect actual alignment and not just the presence or absence of outsiders, but you know what? He's the DM. He can do that. And so don't be in chat being like, Chris Perkins, you are wrong. That's not how that spell works. It's like, no, that's how it works in his game because he's the fucking DM. Oh my God, these people drive me crazy. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here. The point is that from this perspective of you have to do it the way it's written in the book, they screw up rules all the time. Okay, Matt Mercer does the same thing. And you will see people, if you watch Critical Role, you will now I don't pay attention to the chat, and I recommend you don't pay attention to the chat. And I wish they'd just get the stupid chat off there. Who cares about the stupid chat? Especially when you're watching the thing months later. Like, you don't care what some moron said in chat 3 months ago. But anyway, you don't have to pay attention to chat though, because every once in a while, Matt will comment about something someone says in chat. And they're, from his commenting, it sounds like in chat, they're constantly arguing with stuff. Oh, that spell doesn't work like that. You can't do that. And every once in a while, Matt will just comment and say, I'm using a house rule or something like that. He shouldn't have to do that. God, all you annoying people commenting Twitch and YouTube, quit trying to be the DM. Go run your own game. Quit trying to tell us DMs how to DM. Anyway, he does it his own way. And that's the thing is these guys are worried about presenting a cool story and keeping the game moving and making it fun for their players. And those things are much more important to them than how you arbitrate fucking detect evil. Like, what does it really matter? It doesn't matter. Or it does matter, but it matters to the DM. and how the DM wants, I mean, Chris Perkins is running Ravenloft. So my guess is it's not that Chris Perkins doesn't know how Detect Evil works. It's that Chris Perkins decided that for this campaign in Ravenloft, he's going to do it this way because it fits the story better. And it does. If I'm running in Primordia and you cast Detect Evil, you're not going to detect alignment because alignment is not nearly the thing in Primordia that it is in generic D&D. I'm never going to tell you someone's alignment with Detect Evil. Now, it just so happens that the 5th edition rules back me up on that, but even if they didn't, I would still do it that way because I'm making a creative choice as a DM and as a world builder. That's part of the job of being a DM. That's part of what makes being a DM awesome is you can do that stuff. So people like Chris Perkins, Matt Mercer, and myself understand that the rules in the books are a guide for a creative GM. They're not a straitjacket. Okay. The rules in the books are the beginning of good game mastering, not the end. I'll just say that again. The rules in the books are the beginning of being a good GM. They are not the end. In fact, there will probably come a time in your GM growth when you'll start throwing rules out. And that's okay too. What makes a game fun is good story, good role playing, and good interaction at the table, not the fucking rules. People also tend to forget that the DM or the GM is free to change the rules or make his own house rules. Matt does a lot of this. He uses a lot of house rules, so it's like if you're watching Critical Role, before you go to comment on a way Matt's doing something, instead of thinking that you're so smart and you know the game better than him and he fucked up a rule, think, hey, maybe it's a house rule. There's an idea for you. That's his prerogative as DM, making house rules. It doesn't matter. His players have a blast. That's what matters. So my point here is that the rules of an RPG, whatever game you play, can be very intimidating to the would-be GM. And the more complex your game of choice, the more intimidating they can be. But none of that really matters. If you run a fun game, you tell a good story, if you give your players the freedom to make their own decisions, and then you just roll with those decisions and arbitrate the consequences of those decisions, whatever they are, people will have fun. And no one is going to care if you got the rules right or if you mucked up, cover or if you mucked up opportunity attacks. Nobody's going to care. And if you have a player that cares, have a talk with that player, because that player either needs to kind of change where their head's at, or you probably don't want them at your table, because that kind of player is just going to get in the way of you having a good time and get in the way of everybody else having a good time more often than not. So, advice for new GMs. If you're a new GM running your first game or getting ready to run your first game, I would recommend either doing Theater of the Mind, which is where you don't have miniatures, you don't have a battle map or anything like that. You just describe everything to the players. Then they tell you what they want to do, and you tell them if they can do that or not. Or if you feel like you need some kind of visual aid, use a method similar to what Matt Mercer does on Critical Role when it comes to using minis and maps and stuff. So Matt Mercer does it very loosey-goosey. He's not counting squares usually. A lot of times it looks like his maps don't even have squares on them, but he will hand draw out just this is what the terrain is where you are, usually for, big battles, right? Not for everything. And then he has miniatures for the characters so that they can kind of show where they are relative to one another, where they are relative to the bad guys. But it's not a thing of, oh, I can move 6 squares, or, oh, if I move through this square, this guy gets an opportunity attack. He's still arbitrating it in more of a Theater of the Mind style, where the player will be like, can I get to here in my move? Yes, you can, or no, you can't. Or can I move from here to there without taking an opportunity attack? Or can I get out of combat without taking an opportunity attack? Or can I move to a position where I can target that goblin with my firebolt, but be behind cover in respects to this other goblin? That kind of stuff. That's how Theater of the Mind works. You don't have minis and a grid and all that bullshit. You just have a GM who describes where you are, and then you ask for clarifications as a player beyond that. If you need more information, like, is there a rock I can throw up to, or is there a rock I can throw up? Is there a rock I can pick up and throw at someone? Is there a hill I can duck behind? Is there a tree I can climb? You just ask those questions if the description already didn't tell you that. The reason is I think Theater of the Mind is the easiest way to run the game in a lot of ways, but it can be challenging if you as a GM have a hard time visualizing what's going on, or if you have a hard time communicating that to the players, especially in combat. Really, combat is where Theater of the Mind can get rough sometimes. So that's when having some kind of a map and minis can help with that. And if you don't have miniatures, don't go out and buy miniatures. You don't need them. You can just use things that you have around the house. You can use things like coins or chess pieces or board game pieces, whatever. And personally, I think if they don't look like traditional miniatures, if they don't actually look like the thing they're supposed to be, I think that's actually good, because it brings imagination back in, right? The problem with miniatures, and I've seen this so many times using miniatures myself, is people look at the miniatures instead of imagining things in their head. And you'll see this when you have a monster and you don't have a miniature for that monster. So instead you use a different miniature. Like I have an Ifrit attacking the party, but I don't have a miniature of Ifrit, so I have a genie up there instead. See how many times during a combat people reference a genie or get confused that that's an Ifrit and not a genie. It happens because they're looking at the miniature. And as far as your map, you can just make a sketch or a hand-drawn map of an area for combat, and then you can use your tokens or your minis or whatever to show your relative positions so that everybody can kind of keep straight who's where. You don't have to draw it to scale. You don't have to have 5-foot squares. You don't have to count squares for movements. The maps and minis are just there as a visual aid to help people see how the battle's laid out. But players still need to ask you things like, how far is it to that stalagmite over there? Or can I get into melee with that orc this turn? Or if I run over there, will someone get an opportunity attack on me, right? They still need to ask those questions because your map isn't detailed enough that they can just look at the map and know. And this is a good thing. You want that dialogue. So this gets you all used to the narrative nature of RPGs, which is players asking questions, GMs giving answers, GMs giving a description of what's around, players asking for clarification, GM giving more description, players saying, can I do this? GM saying, well, this is, yes, you can, but there's this to think about. That's how RPGs work. And the more you get away from that, the more you get into the tactical war game play of minis on a map, that's not role playing. That's wargaming, which is something else. Nice thing about this, it also sidesteps counting squares, which eats up a lot of time. And it's just not a road you want to go down, especially as a new GM. Because once a player starts thinking that way, it's really hard to break that habit. And what I mean by that is once players start looking down at a table, at a map, at miniatures to answer the question, can I do X? Instead of looking up at the other players and the GM and asking, can I do X? That is going down a road that you don't want to go down. That's going to an experience that you don't want to have. It's not as good an experience as when people are looking up in each other's eyes and having this dialogue. And I've found that the more detailed miniatures and maps that are used when you're playing, the less creative thought there is. And again, it's this tunnel vision into the miniatures and the maps instead of into your creative mindscape. You've got a really detailed map where everything's on the map down to every little chest and every little door. Players don't ask questions about the environment, about things they can use. They don't ask, is there a rock I can pick up? They don't ask, is there a chandelier I can swing from? Because they assume if there were, it would be on the map. Because this map is so detailed and there's no chandelier on the map, so there's no chandelier. Also, as a new GM, you will be well served by being able to play it fast and loose with things like movement speeds, opportunity attacks, and things like that, which you can't do if you have a really detailed scale map and miniatures. You got to count every fucking square, and it gets really hard to just hand wave stuff. You want your monsters and NPCs to be able to do the things that you want them to do in combat. You don't want them to fail to do the thing you want them to do just because you miscounted the squares on the map or you misremembered what their movement speed is, right? You're the GM. If you want the goblins to be able in one turn to run out from behind cover and surround the PCs, you should be able to do that. And I'm telling you, as a new GM, if you're like, no, I want to have miniatures and I want to have a scale map with my 5-foot squares, you're going to have problems. Because you're going to be like, okay, I've got my goblins here. They're hiding. And when the PCs come here, they're going to ambush and come out. And you do that. And some player will be like, wait. That goblin moved too many squares. He can't move that far. They don't really have us surrounded. Or something like that will happen. And it will screw you up. So better to avoid it, at least until you've mastered the system. Once you've mastered the system, once you've mastered being a GM, or at least you're proficient, I shouldn't say master, but you're comfortable with it now, then you can make that decision of, well, maybe I want to bring in the tactical board and miniatures and stuff. And then at least you have an experience of the game without that, so you can see if that the change that it brings to your game, because it will bring a change, I promise you. You can see if that's a change you like or not because you have a frame of reference. But I'd recommend you think hard before you do that. And before you do it, this is a great thing about this day and age. Go on YouTube and watch some actual play. Find some groups playing the game you play and find groups that are using a grid, using minis, and watch their game and see if that's the kind of experience you want to have. Watch them count those squares, baby. You may not like what you see. All right. So now I'm going to go into introducing new players to the hobby. So maybe you're a new GM, maybe you're not a new GM, but you've got some players at your table, have never played your game before and/or never played an RPG before. So here are some tips, how to help out with that, how to help those players have a good time so they can come back. And I want to tell you, this comes as much from mistakes I've made as things I've done that I think went well. In fact, I'm sure I've told this story on the show before. I think I'm partially responsible for turning my wife off of RPGs. And the reason is I broke this first rule I'm going to talk about. Well, not a rule. I hate rules, but this first piece of advice, I didn't take this advice. And, My wife was never keen on playing RPGs, never really thought it would be for her, but I finally talked her into giving it a shot, and I had this golden opportunity. I could have run any game for her. I could have done anything. And what did I do? I totally fucked it up, guys. And some of you probably are already guessing what I did. Okay, first of all, I decided to run Pathfinder for her, which was a mistake. And second of all, the first thing we did was we made a character. We made a Pathfinder character, guys. I know, I was so stupid. What was I thinking? We didn't even get through the character creation process before my wife was like, I fucking hate this. I don't want to do this anymore. All right, so that's my first piece of advice. Use pre-generated characters. This is the best advice I can give. And again, I have only recently learned this myself. I'm a grognard, I will admit it, and I grew up in a school of thought where I would have never played a character someone else made. It was a point of pride that you made your own character. First time I played D&D, I made my own character. That school of thought is wrong. At least when it comes to brand new players. As a brand new player, never played again. You don't need to get pulled into the macho. That's not the right word, but the arrogant kind of like, I have to make my own character. I must play my own character, and I'm being silly. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's why we play these games, right? We want to play our own character. But for a brand new player, I mean, think about it. Okay, even a simple game like Numenera is pretty simple. character creation still takes a while in Numenera. You know, it still takes a while. You're talking probably 15 minutes, half an hour at least to make a character. And there's still going to be, even in a simple game like that, there are going to be things that the new player's doing and they don't know why. Right? It's like, why am I taking this ability? Why is this going to be useful? Why is scan better than whatever? I don't know. Everybody took scan. I don't remember what the other ones were. But okay, so you know, when you make a character, you have to make decisions, and some of those decisions are just kind of story flavor decisions that, you know, a new player could do okay with. But again, do they know anything about the world? Do they know anything about the setting? Probably not, unless you're playing in like Forgotten Realms and they played Baldur's Gate or something and they know something about it from that. But they're also going to have to make decisions that are mechanical based, right? You know, what feat should I take, or which spell should I pick, right? Those kinds of things. And when you've never played the game before, especially if you've never played an RPG at all before, how can you make intelligent decisions? You can't, right? You don't have context. You don't know enough about the game and the system to make those decisions. So it's really frustrating. And it makes you feel right away like, I don't know what I'm doing. It just takes a long time. It takes a lot of time. And you think about it, right? Most gaming experiences, like if I'm going to play a video game, I boot up the video game and I play it. Now, not if I'm playing an MMO or some RPGs, but you know, a lot of video games, like you just start playing the game, right? Or even a board game. Now, board games are getting pretty complicated these days, but if you're going to play a simpler game, like let's say a card game like Euchre, right? If we're going to play Euchre, which if you're not from the Midwest, you may not know what Euchre is, but if you're going to play Euchre, I take maybe 5-10 minutes tops to explain to you how Euchre works, and then we play, and you learn by playing. Like that's how a lot of games are. And that's the way to get someone to play a game. Not, okay, before we play Euchre, I need you to read this book for an hour. And then we're going to spend half an hour making your character. And then we can play Euchre. And in fact, it's probably going to take so long to do all that we're actually not going to play Euchre tonight. We're going to play next week. This week is session 0. We're just getting ready, right? Don't do that to new players. So if you give them a pre-gen, they don't have to go through the character creation process, and you can get them right into the story, right into the role playing, and you can demonstrate to them how the game works. Now, for those of us that are used to the game and we've played the game before, character creation is a lot of fun. And for a lot of us, it's one of the things we really love about the game. We love making characters and deciding, you know, what kind of character we're going to make and stuff, but we're already bought into it. Right. And so it can be hard for us to remember or understand that a new player doesn't think character creation is fun, or probably won't. To them, it's just frustrating, boring, and a seemingly pointless exercise because they've never played the game before. So here's what I recommend. You got a new player, and this is what I would do. Okay. If you're in a situation where you have some experienced players and then one or more completely new players, you know, don't just throw your new player into the deep end with, don't just throw them in the deep end with the experienced players in the middle of a campaign that's already going. Run a short adventure, like a one shot, just to get them used to the system. Okay. So if you're in the middle of a campaign and you're bringing in a new player never played before, take a break from the campaign for a week and run a one shot. Have everybody have everybody play pre-gens, and play this one shot. Okay. Have a wide variety of pre-gens. Try to think about what types of characters people might like to play. You know, so if you're playing a game like D&D that has classes, try to have a character of every class. If not every archetype, at least, you know, every class, or at least the popular ones. Okay. Have a wide range of characters so that, you know, this player can find a character that's the kind of thing they want to play. So have like, you know, the strong, beefy fighter type, and have the wily rogue type, and have the powerful spellcaster type, and all that. And I recommend with your pre-gens that you not give them a name and that you not give them a gender. Okay. Like, I don't get this. Why on earth do pre-gens have genders? It's like, oh, I really wanted to play this knight, but the knight is a man and I want my character to be a woman because I'm a woman. I'm not a woman. I'm being hypothetical. Scared you guys for a second. You're like, all this time I thought he was a man. Fooled you. No. Okay. Right? I mean, it's so stupid. The gender doesn't matter to the character, does it? No, it doesn't matter. So have them, it's just this character is stats with background and everything, but this character doesn't have a name and this character doesn't have a gender. So the player picks the character they want and then they say this character is male or female and here's the character's name. Now, one thing here, coming up with names can be hard. And for a lot of us, it's the hardest part of coming up with a character. You don't want to put your new player through that pain. Also, chances are your new player will either come up with a name that is directly stolen from something, like their character is going to be Quoth or Rand al'Thor or something like that, or Bilbo Baggins, right? You're either going to get that or you're going to get some really stupid, silly name. Not always, but that will happen a lot with new players. So what I suggest is having a list of names and have an equal number of male and female names and just have a list of names and say, okay, pick a character. They pick a character, say the character can be whatever gender you want and not limited to male or female either, whatever gender you want, whatever sexual orientation you want, because again, none of that matters for the game. And here is a list of names. Here's male names, female names. Feel free to choose one of these names, use one of these names for inspiration, or come up with your own name. But if you come up with a really silly name, as a DM, I have the authority to veto your name if it doesn't fit my world or if it's going to kick people out of the story. All right. If you name your character Arnold Schwarzenegger, that's not going to fly because it's going to kick people out of the story. Okay. But they've got a list of names, so they can either pick one of those, they can riff off one of those, or they can come up with their own name. So that's my advice. So you've got your pre-gens, you've got, I'd say at least 2 or 3 times as many pre-gens as you anticipate you'll have players. So there's lots of choices. And, make sure your pre-gens are playable characters. They don't have to be the most optimized character in the world, but make sure that they're good characters. Cause also, you're kind of using this as an opportunity to show them like, this is what a D&D character looks like. This is, so you don't want to show them, this is what the super optimized broken D&D character. No, you don't want to show them that. Well, maybe you do, but I don't want to show them that. But you also don't want to show him like the broken character on the other side that's like completely incapable of doing the thing that he's supposed to do, right? You want to make a good character for him. Okay. And maybe, maybe with the those pre-gens, maybe you stick to stereotypes, right? So you've got the elf wizard and the dwarf fighter and the half elf bard and the halfling rogue, right? I mean, I think that would probably be a good thing to do with these pre-gens is go ahead and embrace the stereotypes and stick to them. And then that way later, after you've hooked them into the game and they're like, yeah, I really dig this, but I want to make my own character now. Then you can say, oh, and you can break stereotypes. Any race can be any class or whatever. So you can be a dwarf wizard or an elf barbarian or a halfling paladin, right? And they might think that's fun, but for that introductory adventure with the pre-gens, maybe stick with stereotypes because people know what those are. The elf archer, right? Everybody knows what that is. So come up with a good introductory one-shot adventure that you can run in one session. And I would keep this adventure pretty straightforward. You want a nice plot-directed adventure. You don't want a sandbox for this. You want something where there's an obvious, this is what we should do kind of thing, because a lot of times brand new players are going to freeze if you put them in a sandbox. They'll be deer in headlights. Like, I don't know what to do. You need to guide them through this first session, this first experience. New players often need a lot of guidance, and you want to provide that because remember, our goal here, okay, our goal is not to kill the characters and show them how awesome we are as DM and that we have all power over them. I'm looking at you, Lost Minds of Phandelver. This is not our goal. Our goal is not to bewilder the players with the complexity of our game and show them how smart we are as DMs because we can manage all this. That is not our goal. Our goal is not to bore our players to tears so that they never, ever want to play a game like this again. No, our goal is for our players to have a fun evening with their friends, for them to laugh, for them to have a good time, for it to be as stress and worry-free as possible, for it to be easy, and for them just to enjoy themselves. Because if that happens, chances are much better that they're going to come back. All right? If the character dies, chances are as good they're going to come back. If they have to sit through a long, frustrating, pointless to them seeming character creation session before they actually get to play, they may not come back. They have to make a lot of hard decisions, or if they're thrown in a sandbox with no clear direction where to go, and everybody just kind of sits around and stares at each other for 10 minutes before anything happens, they may not come back. You want to give them the best experience you can, the best memory that you can, so they have nothing but positive associations with this hobby, so they come back. All right, so we've got our pre-generated characters. We're doing an introductory one-shot adventure that we can get through in one night. We're keeping it straightforward. We're going plot-directed as opposed to sandbox. We're going to have a story that's going to guide the player characters along. So we're going to look for or create an adventure that does this. We want an adventure that is going to show the basic mechanics of the game. So D&D, for example, we want an adventure where there's going to be some combat. There's going to be some ability checks, various ability checks, and saving throws. Because in D&D, those are the three main mechanics that the game is built off of. So we want to show the players how to do combat, how to do ability checks, how to do saving throws. So either find an adventure, a good introductory adventure that does that, or come up with one. Come up with an adventure that's got, one or two combat encounters so they can learn about initiative. They can learn about attacking and doing damage and armor class and how all that works. Have a social encounter so they can do some social roles and see how that works and learn how, in an RPG, it's not just acting. It's not just how good of an actor can you be. You have these game stats to help you. So your character might be more charismatic than you are. Your character might be a better liar than you are. And that's okay. Your ability or your inability at lying is not going to limit your character's ability at lying. That's why we have these game mechanics. So you show them that. And then saving throws, you show them how that works in a combat or elsewhere. Have someone cast a spell at them and they have to make a saving throw, or they encounter poison and they have to make a saving throw. Also, you want to start forming good habits here. Like anything in life, you want to learn to do things the right way from the beginning and learn good habits from the beginning. So encourage them to speak in first person. So if your new player starts, he's playing Relgor the dwarf and he says, Relgor goes up and no. This is how we do it in this game. You say, I go up and smack the noble across the face. Okay. Oh, okay. I go up and I smack the noble across the face and I say to him that he's a jerk. Okay. Also, the way that we do this in this hobby is you speak in first person. So instead of saying Kelgor goes up, slaps the noble and calls him a jerk, you say, I go up, I slap the noble across the face. You, sir, are an asshole, and I will have none of it. You actually say the dialogue. Don't tell me the dialogue, say it. Okay? Again, we are teaching these people how to play. So if you're going to teach them to play, why not teach them the best way to play? Speak in first person. All right, so you've got your adventure. You've got your pre-generated characters. Your players have chosen their characters. They've named them. They've sexed them. All that good stuff. You're getting ready to start the first session. Set the scene, give them a description and start them out somewhere where they can do a little role playing. Open with a scene where they can role play if they want to. So you could start with them in like the common room of an inn. It's a classic. It's a cliche, but it's a great way to start an adventure, especially with new players. Or you could start them out sitting around a campfire on a road. So the idea here is you start them out somewhere where they can just role play in character and they have the freedom to do so for as long as they want. Start out and have each player describe their character and tell the other players what they know about their character. And if you haven't already done so, you can kind of come up with a shared history. And, you know, just for simplicity, I would just tell them, you know, you guys have known each other for a while, you've worked together, you know, but to what degree it is up to you, and let them figure that out. But yeah, have them start out, have them describe their character, tell the players things that they would know about their character. Now, you want to think about the order that you're going to do this, because you don't want, if you have one player who is really going to go out with this and they're going to go on and on about their description, and usually there's at least one in a group. And if you know who that person is, you do not want that person to go first. You want that person to go last. Because the reason is if the first person stands up and gives this really in-depth description, then the other players are going to think that they have to do that to that level. Like that bar has been set really high from the beginning, right? And you don't want that with new players. So, you know, if you have a sense of who will be the more descriptive people and the people that will be more comfortable doing this, have them go towards the end. Okay. And what will happen is, you know, so the first player goes and he says, my guy's average height, average build, brown hair, brown eyes, and he carries a sword. And that's all he says, which is fine. That's fine, right? And then, you know, next player goes, and then your third player goes into his armor and, you know, what color the armor is and how it's decorated and all this stuff. And what will often happen is one of those earlier players will be like, oh, wait, I didn't describe my armor. Can I describe my armor? And that's fine. That's awesome, you know, because the more descriptive player has led to the earlier player thinking of something about their character that they probably didn't even think about their armor before, right? It just didn't enter their mind. Oh, what does my armor look like? But they hear this other player describing their armor and they're like, oh, and they get an idea. And part of the reason they get an idea is there's no pressure because they've already gone, right? If that player hadn't already given his description and he's going next, now there's pressure because he's like, oh crap, I got to describe my armor too. I didn't think of anything for my armor, right? And there's like pressure there. So that's why I recommend you let the more descriptive players go last, because they will still inspire more description from the earlier players, but you gave those earlier players a chance to just give you what they had without feeling like they weren't living up. Okay, because you're always going to have a player or two that is just going to go above and beyond what the other players do, and that's fine. But let them go last, and then if the other players want to add stuff, that's fine. So you open up, you let them describe their characters, and you have a scene where they can role play, like in the common room of an inn or around a campfire or whatever. And in this scene, have at least one NPC that you as the GM can use to role play and interact with the players, and use this NPC, like maybe it's the innkeeper, right? To try to draw them out, you know, come and talk to them, ask them about their characters, or ask, you know, if one of them has an ancestral weapon that's a nice sword you've got there. Bet it has a story, you know, try to draw them out. Okay. Try to encourage them to role play with each other. And if that happens, awesome. Just let it ride. You know, if they start role playing with you and or with each other, just ride that wave as far as it will take you. Just let them role play as long as they want. However, you also want to have an event that is going to happen that's going to springboard the actual adventure. And you want this event to happen in this initial scene with the role playing. So if they're in the common room of the inn, something is going to happen in the common room of the inn that's going to move things forward. And you're just waiting for your moment to spring that. So if they really get into the role playing and they're enjoying it and they're doing it, that moment is after they're done. And you don't want to have dead air. You don't want to have like everybody sitting around, looking around like, okay, now what do we do? Right. So you got to kind of anticipate like, okay, the role playing's winding down. It's kind of trailing off. So I'm going to interject my event now before the role playing completely dies. Or if they don't bite on the role playing, just make it happen right now. Don't have this feeling of everybody sitting around waiting for someone to say something, or this feeling of, oh, we're supposed to be role playing, or we're supposed to be doing this thing I don't understand, but we're not. Don't let that happen. You'll be able to tell. You have your NPC come up to the party and try to interact with them, and if they don't really respond, something happens. Go right to the event. Maybe someone comes running in from the street screaming, someone's been murdered, or whatever is going to hook you into the story that you want to tell that night. Have that event happen right now. And then you want to plan for, I'd say 2 to 3 encounters for your first session. Or another way to say it is 1 or 2 encounters fewer than what you think you would normally need. First sessions like this usually take longer. Encounters usually take longer when you have new players because they don't know the rules. So you're going to have to explain things and probably have to explain things multiple times. So it just takes longer. So you want to allow for that. And you also want to allow the players all the time that they want to role play between encounters, during encounters, before and after encounters, right? You don't want to limit their role playing because you feel like you have this schedule you have to keep. If they're role playing and having fun, let them do it for as long as they want. And then kind of an optional thing that you can do is if you want, you can leave a hook at the end of the adventure, at the end of the session that can draw the PCs on to greater adventures if the players decide that they want to continue with the story. So you can kind of end with a button that's like, oh, here's something else you could do, or there's a reveal at the end or something like that. And then that way, if these players are like, hey, that was fun, we want to keep going, they can keep going and you can have a continuation of that story. Or you can start something new. So now you've run this introductory adventure. You've kind of, shown everybody how the system works. They've had a chance to get a feel for things. And then you can either continue the story you've started, or you can start your campaign proper, or bring them into your previously established campaign. And at this point, the players can either continue to play the pre-generated characters that they were playing, or they could choose a new pre-generated character, or they could make their own character. However, I would let the player make that decision, and I would not pressure them to make a character until they're ready to make one. And they'll come to a point. Every player comes to a point where it's like, okay, I get this game, I'm having fun, but I want to make my own character now. I want to play my own character. And personally, like if you're playing a game like D&D with levels and whatnot, if you're doing like not just a one shot, but you're doing like a campaign, and maybe this player plays the pre-gen for a few sessions and levels a couple times, and then he's like, I want to make a new character now. I would make the new character at the level that the old character was. I would not like make them start at first level again. Again, you want the player to have fun. You want them to enjoy the hobby. We're not here to like tax them to death and make them hate it. They did their time with the pre-gen. They should get to enjoy second or third level with their new character that they build. Unless you feel that it will be too much. Maybe they want to play a wizard and you're like, man, I don't want to, their pre-gen was a fighter. I don't want to throw a third level wizard at them. So we're going to start at first level. Like that's fine. But just make sure that the player understands that and that you're not punishing them, just say, hey, the wizard is the most complicated class to play in this game. So I'm doing you a favor by starting you at first level, but you're going to go through like a level a session, right? Like you're not going to be first level for very long, but this way you can kind of ease into it. And then, if you have a whole group of new players and you do that first adventure and they're all like, we want to make new characters, then, again, you can decide, do we want to continue this story with the new characters or do we want to start something new? And it's great to ask your players. So there you go. There's some thoughts on running an adventure for brand new players. And again, I think if you just keep in the front of your mind that you just want to give them a good time and you want to give them as positive an impression of the hobby as you can and let that guide your decisions, I think you'll do fine. I think you'll do great. And again, if you're a new GM or you're considering becoming a new GM, just go for it, man. It's a lot of fun. It's not that hard. And the work that's involved is fun. I mean, players, they're at the whim of the game master, right? They get to play once a week or whatever, whenever the game master gets everybody together for a game. And that's when they get to play. As a GM, you get to play all the time. Anytime you have a free moment, you can be building your world or thinking about your next adventure or deciding what kind of magic items you're going to hand out. It's a lot of fun. One of the things that makes this show awesome is when I hear from you. I love getting feedback from my listeners. I love getting ideas for episodes, ideas for segments, thoughts, feelings about things I've talked about. So you can reach me at GameMastersJourney@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @LexStarWalker. You can follow me on Google Plus LexStarWalker. Check out my website, StarWalkerStudios.com. You can find the show notes for Game Master's Journey there. You can find my other podcasts there. You can also find a link to the Game Master's Journey Google Plus community where you can connect with other listeners and other gamers. We talk about RPGs and all kinds of stuff. Great community. You can also find a link to my Primordia subreddit where you can talk about Primordia if you're into that and into the world building, and also a link to my YouTube channel where you can find my actual play videos. And finally, on the Star Walker Studios website, you can find a link to my Patreon page where you can support the show and help keep Game Master's Journey going. And at the bottom of the show notes for this episode, or any of the Game Master's Journey episodes, there are numerous other ways that you can support the show. I have Amazon referral links. You can use it, shop on Amazon. You can get a free trial of Audible books from Game Master's Journey. Leave reviews on iTunes and Stitcher. There's all kinds of stuff you can do to help out the show, help new gamers find the show, and keep us going. Well, I was hoping to do a world building segment this week, but episode went a little long. I originally was just going to talk about running a game for new players, and then I decided to bring in some stuff about becoming a new game master, so went a little long. So I will save the world building stuff for next week. And I've got quite a bit of world building stuff piling up. So maybe I'll just do a full world building episode next week. I don't know. We'll have to see. So again, I would love to hear from you. Any comments or thoughts about this episode? If you have any tips for new GMs or tips for running a game for new players that I didn't cover, let me know. And I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Star Walker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.